The sun hung mercilessly over Arroyo Seco, casting long shadows that seemed to tremble in the heat like mirages on the parched earth. The town, a sparse cluster of adobe structures cracked and bleached by years of unforgiving desert winds, circled around the old well that had long ago dried to a hollow cavern of dust and secrets. It stood in the center like a blackened scar, its rim cracked and crumbling, a monument to a past when water had flowed and life had thrived. Mara Silva stood at the edge of the main square, her lean frame silhouetted against the harsh light. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, exposing sharp eyes that flicked nervously to the well where children had gathered. Their laughter was a brittle sound, light on the surface, but hiding something deeper, a tremor of fear beneath the mirth. Tomas, her younger brother, was among them, his sun-bleached hair catching the light as he darted forward, eyes wide and curious. She felt a cold grip of apprehension tighten in her chest. Every summer, some child disappeared. Every summer, the well's hunger grew. And every summer, the town wrapped itself tighter in whispered prayers and the heavy cloak of fatalism. "Tomas," she called, voice sharp enough to cut through the dust-laden air. He glanced back, a faint smile flickering, but his gaze was drawn irresistibly to the well's dark hollow. He took a hesitant step closer, and her heart pounded. "Stay away from there." Mara's voice was urgent, but the other children paid no heed, caught in their ritual dance around the well's edge. She knew the stories, the ancient worship that had twisted the well into a dark deity demanding sacrifice. The town elders spoke in riddles and old prayers, their faces drawn tight with fear and reverence. To them, the well was a source of salvation, a cruel but necessary guardian of Arroyo Seco's survival. But to Mara, it was a gaping maw of dread, a void that swallowed hope and light. She turned away, seeking refuge in the shade of her home, where the air was thick with the scent of dried sage and the faint bitterness of dust. Isabel, her mother, sat by the worn wooden table, her hands folded as if in silent prayer. Mara's eyes met hers, searching for answers in the lines etched by years of grief and resignation. "He's drawn to it," Mara whispered, voice barely audible. "Tomas. He doesn't understand what it means." Isabel's gaze dropped, her lips pressed into a thin line. "None of us do," she said softly. "But the well, it demands." Outside, the townsfolk moved like shadows under the blazing sun, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, voices low and cautious. Mara's childhood friend, Lucia Torres, approached, her dark hair clinging damply to her forehead, eyes bright but clouded with fear. "They say the well hungers more this year," Lucia murmured, glancing toward the empty pit. "The disappearances, the silence afterward." Mara nodded, a fire kindling behind her doubt. "I won't let it take Tomas, not this time." At the far edge of the square, Elias Marquez, the town elder, stood beneath the brittle shade of a twisted mesquite tree. His weathered face bore the weight of countless summers, his sun-bleached hair falling over dusty robes. Mara approached him cautiously. "Tell me," she demanded, "what is it that we're really giving to the well?" Elias's eyes, clouded with age and sorrow, met hers. His voice was a rasp, thick with unspoken truths. "The well is not just empty stone. It is the hunger beneath the earth, the thirst that never quenches. It demands sacrifice to keep the town alive." A chill slid down Mara's spine despite the relentless heat. The well was a dark god, a shadow cast over Arroyo Seco, and Tomas was already caught in its gaze. As the sun dipped low, turning the sky a bruised purple, Mara stood once more at the edge of the well. The children's laughter had faded into an uneasy silence. the air heavy with the scent of dust and desperation. Tomos's small figure lingered near the rim, eyes fixed on the abyss. Mara's voice broke the silence, trembling but fierce. "I'll find a way to stop this, I swear it." But beneath her words, the well waited, hollow, endless, and hungry. And the desert whispered back. The desert sun hung low and merciless over Arroyo Seco, relentless and unforgiving as it baked the cracked earth around the hollow well. Mara Silva stood at the edge of the town square, her gaze fixed on the jagged stone rim of the well that yawned like a dark wound in the parched soil. Children's laughter bubbled nearby, brittle and forced, as they played under the relentless hitter of fragile veneer, masking the gathering dread that clung to the air like dust. Her younger brother, Tomas, had been unusually quiet this afternoon. Normally full of boundless energy, he now lingered too close to the well's edge, his wide sun-bleached hair shimmering in the harsh light. Mara's sharp eyes noted the way his small hands gripped the cool stone, as if drawn by some unseen force. There was a pull in the air, something unspoken, something terrible. "Tomas, come away from there," Mara called out, her voice cracking with urgency. The boy turned, flashing a brief, innocent smile, but before she could move to him, a sudden gust of dry wind swept through the square. Tomas vanished in an instant. No scream, no struggle, just an empty silence where he had stood. Panic seized Mara's chest. She sprinted to the well's rim, peering down into the hollow abyss that seemed to swallow the light. The well was dry, cracked at the bottom, but the darkness beneath was impenetrable, endless. "Tomas," she cried again, voice raw and desperate. Around her, the townsfolk gathered, faces etched with fear and resignation. No one stepped forward to help. Instead, wary eyes flicked away, and whispers threaded through the crowd like poisonous smoke. Mara's heart pounded as she realized the silence wasn't ignorance, it was complicity. She hurried to the narrow alleys, seeking answers. An old man, his face creased like the desert's cracked earth, averted his gaze when she pressed him. "You don't want to know what lies beneath," he murmured, voice trembling. "The well, it takes what it needs. It feeds on the children." Mara's breath caught. "Why? How? Sacrifice?" he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "It's the only way the town survives. The well demands it every summer." Her mind reeled. The childhood tales, the rituals, the hushed warnings. They weren't superstition. They were a grim reality. Later that day, Mara sought out Lucia Torres, her childhood friend, in the dim shade of an adobe porch. Lucia's dark eyes were heavy with worry. "They say Tomas was taken by the Hollow One," she said softly. "But I've been trying to hide the children, keep them safe." Mara grasped her friend's hands. "We have to find him. We have to stop this." But the town's grip was tightening. At the chapel, Father Rosell's sermons wove the well's dark demands into supplications of faith. His voice was calm, but the congregation's faces were pale, haunted. Mara's protests were met with cold stares and murmured prayers. That night, sleep eluded Mara. Her dreams were invaded by shadows, whispering shapes that slithered beneath the well's rim, eyes like pits of darkness staring into her soul. She awoke drenched in sweat, heart racing, the boundary between nightmare and reality blurred. The sun rose again over Arroyo Seco, relentless and unforgiving, and Mara knew she was alone in her fight. The well's hunger was vast, and the shadows lengthened with every disappearing child. But she would not surrender to the silence. Tomas was out there somewhere, swallowed by the darkness, and she would drag him back no matter the cost. The desert's thirst was not just for water. It was a hunger that devoured hope, twisting faith into fear, sacrifice into nightmare. Mara's journey was only beginning, and the shadows beneath the hollow well waited patiently to claim their next victim. The sun hung low over Arroyo Seco, its unforgiving light casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked earth. Mara Silva tightened her grip on the strap of her bag as she approached the weathered adobe house perched on the edge of the town's dusty square. Inside, she hoped to find answers. Answers Elias Marquez had long held, but seldom shared. The door creaked open under her tentative knock. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ancient paper and desert dust, swirling in the faint breeze that filtered through a cracked window. Elias sat hunched over a cluttered table, his sun-bleached hair a wild halo in the dim light. His face, carved by years of desert storms and heavy guilt, regarded Mara with a mixture of wariness and resignation. "You came," Elias said softly, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "I feared you might." Mara swallowed the knot in her throat. "I need to know, Elias, about the well, about the disappearances, about Tomas." For a long moment, silence hung thick between them. Then Elias reached beneath the table, retrieving a fragile manuscript bound in cracked leather and yellowed parchment. The weight of the book seemed to press down on the room, as if the very knowledge within carried its own burden. "This is what has been hidden," Elias whispered, cracking open the tome with trembling fingers. The story of Arroyo Seco, before the well dried, before the children vanished. The pages revealed faded illustrations of a time when the well was a source of life, its waters pure and abundant. But as drought gripped the land, the well turned barren, and with it, the town's hope. A darkness crept in, a shadow born from desperation and whispered prayers. "We called it the Hollow One," Elias said, voice barely more than a breath. A hunger that grew with each sacrifice. The well became a god of thirst and oblivion, demanding offerings to survive. Mara's heart pounded. The stories she'd dismissed as superstition now bore the weight of truth. And the children, they are the price, Elias admitted, eyes downcast. Each summer, one is given to the well, to the Hollow One, to keep the town alive. But the hunger is endless. It grows stronger, and so does the toll. Outside, the wind stirred the dust in swirling eddies, as if the desert itself mourned the town's fate. Mara's gaze drifted to the window, where the harsh sunlight seemed to burn away hope. "I won't let Tomas be next," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. Elias looked up, a flicker of something like hope or, perhaps, despair shining in his eyes. "Then you must be prepared for what lies beneath." As Mara stepped back into the sun, the weight of knowledge pressed down upon her. The well's hunger was not just a legend. It was a living darkness, feeding on fear, faith, and sacrifice. And now, it had marked her family. The desert stretched out before her, vast and unforgiving, but Mara's resolve burned brighter than the scorching sun. She would face the Hollow One, no matter the cost. Yet as the dust settled and shadows lengthened, a whisper drifted on the hot breeze. The well's dark hunger was far from sated, and the children of Arroyo Seco would continue to vanish into its bottomless depths. The night was coming, and with it, a dread that Mara could no longer ignore. The adobe walls of Elias's home held secrets older than the town itself. Mara traced her fingers over the cracked spines of books lining the shelves, each one a repository of forgotten knowledge and forbidden truths. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows, as if the past itself wavered against the fragile glow. Elias watched her closely, his eyes reflecting the flickering flame and a lifetime of regret. "These texts were passed down from the founders," he explained. "They chronicled the pact made when the well first dried, a pact sealed with blood and silence. He opened a page depicting a ritual circle etched in sand, surrounded by figures cloaked in shadows. They believed sacrifice would appease the Hollow One, a force born from the well's depths, a creature of insatiable thirst and endless hunger. Mara's breath hitched. But how can anyone live with such a burden? They don't, Elias said quietly. Fear binds us. Faith blinds us. And the well, it waits. The room seemed to grow colder despite the desert heat, the oppressive weight of history pressing in on Mara's chest. Her thoughts swirled with visions of Tomas, wide-eyed and smiling, unaware of the darkness looming just beyond the well's cracked rim. You must understand, Elias continued, that the Hollow One is not just a monster. It is the embodiment of our desperation, our sacrifice, our broken faith. It feeds on more than flesh. It consumes hope. Mara clenched her fists. Then I'll fight it. For Tomas, for the children. Elias nodded slowly, a faint glimmer of respect in his weary eyes. If you do, you walk a path few have dared, but knowledge is your weapon, and courage your shield. Outside, the desert night deepened. The stars blinked cold and distant, silent witnesses to the town's secret agony. Mara stepped into the darkness, the echoes of forbidden lore whispering in her mind, a chilling reminder that the Hollow One's hunger was far from sated. And so the cycle continued, a town held captive by fear, a well that devoured innocence, and a girl determined to face the abyss. The dust settled once more, but the whispers in the desert wind promised Mara's visit to Elias Marquez was a turning point, a descent into the shadowed heart of Arroyo Seco's curse. The elder's reluctant confessions unveiled the terrible truth. The well was not merely a dried-up relic, but a gateway to something far darker, a hunger that demanded sacrifice, a thirst that could never be quenched. As Mara walked back through the parched streets, the weight of her newfound knowledge pressed heavily on her. The sun beat down relentlessly, the cracked earth beneath her feet a stark reminder of the town's fragility. Every glance toward the hollow well sent a shiver crawling down her spine. She knew now what she must face. The Hollow One was real, and it was waiting. But Mara Silva was no ordinary girl. Resilient and fiercely protective, her determination burned through the suffocating dread. With each step, she vowed to unravel the dark threads binding Arroyo Seco, to break the cycle of sacrifice and silence. The desert whispered its secrets, and Mara was listening. The hollow well waited silently, its dark hunger awakening anew. And the children continued to vanish, swallowed by the endless abyss beneath the sun-scorched earth. The fight was only beginning. The sun beat down mercilessly on Arroyo Seco. Its rays scorched across the cracked earth until even the stones seemed to hiss with thirst. At the town's heart, the dried-up well yawned like a black wound in the desert floor. Its mouth rimmed with jagged stones, stained dark by years of neglect and whispered rites. Mara Silva stood at the edge, her sharp eyes scanning the hollow darkness, a restless unease crawling beneath her skin. The heat pressed on her like a suffocating blanket, sweat tracing lines down her sun-tanned face. But it was the silence that felt heavier, the silence of a town that dared not speak too loudly of what lurked beneath. Despite the warnings whispered among the townsfolk, veiled threats wrapped in concerned advice, Mara's curiosity gnawed at her relentlessly. The visions that had begun to haunt her nights, shadows flickering just beyond the edge of waking, urged her forward. She knew the well was more than a dried-up source of water. It was a crucible of the town's darkest fears and its most desperate hopes. As she traced the cracked earth around the well, her footsteps stirring dust that danced like restless spirits in the dry air. A familiar voice broke through the oppressive stillness. Mara, it was Lucia Torres, slender as always, her dark hair pulled back hastily, eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and determination. I didn't expect to find you here alone. Mara turned, the sharp lines of her face softening momentarily at the sight of her childhood friend. I couldn't stay away. Not with Tomas missing. Not with everything happening. Lucia hesitated, glancing around as if the very air might betray their conversation. There are things you don't know, things I've kept hidden because I was afraid. Afraid of what it means if the wrong people find out. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and dry sage, swirling around them like a portent. Mara's heart quickened. Tell me, under the shadow of a gnarled mesquite, Lucia lowered her voice to a whisper. Every summer, it's not just the well that claims the children. Some of us have tried to shield them, to hide them away, but the town's rituals run deep. The sacrifices, they are more than superstition, they are a pact, and breaking it could mean doom for all of us. Mara's hands clenched into fists, the memory of Tomas's innocent smile flashing before her eyes. Then we have to stop it. We have to find a way out of this. Lucia's gaze faltered, shadowed by the weight of her secret. I want to believe that too, but the well's hunger is ancient. It feeds on more than just flesh, feeds on fear, on faith twisted into desperation. Together, they moved cautiously around the well's perimeter, their steps stirring relics half buried beneath the dust. Mara's fingers traced faint carvings etched into a weathered stone, symbols that pulsed with a dark history. These markings, they speak of sacrifice, of blood and thirst. Lucia nodded, her voice barely audible. They are remnants of a time when the well still held water. When the town was young and the entity beneath was a whisper rather than a roar. The sun began its slow descent, bleeding amber light across the horizon and casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the growing dusk. Mara felt the air thicken, the desert's thirst turning tangible, a parching presence that clawed at her throat and mind. It's like the well. It's alive, Mara murmured, her breath shallow. It's watching, waiting. Lucia shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter. And it will not be sated until it has its due. The two friends stood in strained silence, the weight of unspoken fears pressing down on them as the first stars blinked into the darkening sky. Somewhere, distant and faint, the town murmured its prayers, a chorus of desperation entwined with blind faith. Mara's resolve hardened. She could feel the tendrils of the Hollow One's influence creeping closer, twisting the very fabric of reality around Arroyo Seco. Yet beneath the crushing dread, a spark of defiance flickered stubbornly within her. She would not let the well's dark hunger claim another child without a fight. As night settled like a shroud, Mara glanced once more into the abyss of the well, the darkness seeming to pulse with a life of its own. I will find you, Tomas, she whispered, no matter what it takes. And with that vow, she turned away from the edge, stepping back into the shadows of the town, a place where every secret was a threat, and every ally a fragile hope in the suffocating desert night. But the well was patient, the thirst was endless, and the Hollow One waited beneath, watching, hungry for the next sacrifice. The desert wind carried a low, mournful sigh as Mara disappeared into the gathering darkness, the promise of salvation tangled with the inevitability of sacrifice. The desert air hung heavy and still beneath a black, cloudless sky as Mara trudged onward, her footsteps crunching over cracked earth and brittle stones. Her skin was slick with sweat despite the chilling night, the relentless heat of the day having bled into the lingering warmth of the evening. Somewhere beyond the rim of the distant mountains, the moon had yet to rise, leaving Arroyo Seco cloaked in an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow light whole. Mara's mind raced with fragments of stories she'd heard whispered in shadowed corners of the town. Tales of the Hollow One, the dark entity born from the well's long-forgotten waters, and the desperate sacrifices of generations past. Now, clutching a worn leather-bound journal she'd discovered hidden beneath the floorboards of Elias Marquez's old home, she sought answers buried beneath layers of myth and fear. The brittle pages, yellowed and fragile, bore the scrawled handwriting of a long-dead ancestor, chronicling rituals and warnings enshrouded in cryptic symbolism. Mara's sharp eyes traced the jagged carvings depicted within twisted figures entwined with serpentine shadows, spirals of thirst and hunger, and the ever-present image of the well itself, a yawning maw beneath the earth. As she pressed deeper into the desert, the wind began to stir, carrying with it a low, mournful whisper that curled around her like a serpent's hiss. The shadows lengthened and shifted, distorting beneath the spectral light of distant stars. Mara's heart pounded, each beat a frantic drum against the cavern of her ribs. Suddenly, a shape flickered at the edge of her vision, a dark fluid form, shifting and writhing, its eyes like pits of endless night. The Hollow One had sensed her. Panic surged, thick and suffocating, as unseen tendrils of thirst clawed at her mind, whispering promises of oblivion and release. Mara stumbled, the journal slipping from her grasp as the creature's shadowy tendrils brushed against her skin, cold as death. The desert erupted into a cacophony of spectral voices, the anguished cries of lost children, the murmurs of ancient pacts, the relentless hunger that had devoured the souls of Arroyo Seco for centuries. Mara's vision blurred, the world fracturing into shards of nightmare and despair. Desperation lent her strength. Gritting her teeth, she forced her limbs to move, crawling toward the faint silhouette of the dried-up well looming like a dark sentinel against the horizon. The air was thick with dust and silence, broken only by her ragged breaths and the distant, mocking laughter of vanished children. Collapsing beside the cracked stones, Mara's fingers closed around the journal once more. Her eyes, burning with exhaustion and sorrow, scanned the words that now carried the weight of truth. The Hollow One was not merely a creature, but the embodiment of the town's collective dread. A monstrous reflection of blind faith and sacrifice twisted into an insatiable hunger. As dawn crept over the desert, the first pale light barely touched the edges of the well. Mara knew her journey was far from over. The echoes of the forgotten past had spoken, and their chilling message was clear. Survival came at a price, and the well's dark hunger would not be sated easily. Yet beneath the crushing weight of despair flickered the fragile spark of resolve. Mara's eyes hardened with grim determination. The town's secrets would not remain buried forever, and she would face the darkness no matter the cost. The desert held its breath, waiting, and Mara stepped forward into the shadows once more. The oppressive heat of Arroyo Seco bore down with relentless intensity. The sun, a merciless overseer of the parched earth and cracked adobe walls. Mara Silva wiped a bead of sweat from her brow as she pushed open the heavy wooden door of the town's small church. The hinges groaned, a sound swallowed almost instantly by the stale air thickened with the scent of incense and centuries-old dust. Inside, Father Roselles stood at the pulpit, his figure bathed in the dim light filtering through stained glass, casting fractured colors on the worn floorboards. His voice rose, calm yet laced with a quiet authority, chanting prayers that seemed less for salvation than for submission. The congregation sat rigid, faces etched with resignation and fear, their eyes fixed on the pulpit as if it were the only anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Mara's footsteps echoed sharply as she strode forward, the dry wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. Her eyes, sharp and resolute despite the exhaustion shadowing them, locked onto Father Rosel's. Her voice broke through the murmurs, sharp and unwavering. How long will you preach obedience while children disappear? How long will you let the well swallow them whole under the guise of faith? A hush fell, thick and suffocating. Father Rosel's eyes narrowed, the faintest trace of a smile flickering and dying on his lips. Faith is the only shield we have, Mara. Without it, the desert claims us all. The well is our covenant, our protection. But protection at what cost? Mara shot back, her voice rising. You hide behind sermons to mask the truth. The sacrifices you condone them. The priest's expression hardened. The sacrifices keep the darkness at bay. You would see the town destroyed for your pride. Mara's fists clenched. The congregation shifted uncomfortably, some averting their gazes, others whispering prayers that trembled with doubt. The church, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage forged from fear. When Mara left the church, the sun blazed down anew, its unforgiving heat a mirror of the turmoil roiling inside her. She made her way to Elias Marquez's home, a modest adobe dwelling shaded by a withered mesquite tree. The door creaked open at her knock, and the old man's weathered face appeared, eyes clouded with the weight of years. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dry earth and old paper. Elias lit a candle, the flickering flame casting long shadows against cracked walls. He motioned for Mara to sit. For years, I have carried this burden, he began, his voice hoarse. I was once part of the sacrifices. I helped select the children, convinced it was necessary. But each loss is a knife to my soul. This town, it's trapped in a cycle of fear and hunger. Mara's breath caught. The truth she had sought lay bare between them, raw and suffocating. Why? She whispered. Because the well's hunger is endless, Elias replied, eyes glistening with tears. And we feed it with our children. Outside, the parched earth cracked beneath Mara's boots as she stepped back into the blistering afternoon. The wind whispered across the empty streets, carrying faint echoes of worshippers preparing for the next ritual. The town's collective thirst for survival had become a curse, a chain of sacrifices forged in shadows and silence. As dusk fell, Mara found herself alone on the dusty street, the sun dipping behind the horizon and casting long, ravenous shadows over the town. Her gaze settled on the hollow well, a dark scar etched into the earth's belly. The burden of knowledge pressed on her chest, heavy and unyielding, but within it kindled a fierce flame of resolve. She would confront the darkness, no matter the cost. The cycle must be broken. But as night deepened, the desert whispered its ancient secrets, and the well's hunger stirred once more, waiting patiently for the next sacrifice. Mara's journey was only beginning. The sun scorched the cracked earth of Arroyo Seco with an unforgiving glare. But inside Mara Silva, a storm raged far fiercer. The heat had softened only slightly with the fading of the day, yet her thoughts burned relentlessly, charring the fragile threads of faith she had once clung to. She sat on the rough adobe steps of her home, the coarse texture biting into her bare palms as she stared out toward the hollow well at the town's center. Its silhouette, jagged and black against the reddening sky, seemed to pulse with a dark heartbeat she could no longer deny. Around her, the town moved in its habitual rhythm. The low murmur of prayers floated on the dry air, a litany of supplications to a god whose mercy had long since dried up like the well itself. Children's laughter, brittle and strained, echoed faintly from the streets, hiding beneath it the unspoken dread that gripped every household. Mara's eyes narrowed, haunted by the memory of Tomas's disappearance, and the growing silence that had swallowed his small voice. Her breath hitched as doubt clawed at her heart. The rituals, the sacrifices, were they truly the price for survival, or the chains that bound them to a nightmare neither the town nor the well could escape? She had once believed in the stories, the old ways. But now, that old faith lay in ruins, scattered like the parched dust beneath her feet. A sudden knock at the door pulled Mara from her reverie. It was Lucia, her slender figure outlined against the dimming light, eyes wide with both fear and determination. Without greeting, Lucia stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. "Mara," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I couldn't wait any longer. I have to show you something." Curiosity and unease warred within Mara as Lucia produced a folded bundle of worn papers. Unfurling them revealed names children from the town, many of whom had vanished or were at risk. Some names were crossed out, others circled with frantic strokes. "These are the ones I've hidden," Lucia confessed, glancing around nervously. "I can't stand by and watch them disappear anymore." Mara's heart pounded. This was rebellion, quiet but dangerous. To protect these children was to defy the well's hunger, the town's collective will. Yet, in Lucia's desperate hope, Mara found a flicker of the courage she thought she had lost. But their alliance was fragile. The town's elders, led by Elias Marquez, still clung to the old ways with grim resolve, and Father Rosales, the priest whose sermons wove Christian doctrine with the cult's dark worship, cast a long shadow of control and fear. That Sunday morning, Mara found herself in the cracked pews of the church, the air thick with incense and the suffocating weight of expectation. Father Rosel's voice rose and fell like a sermonized storm, each word a thunderclap against the fragile hope Mara and Lucia nurtured. "Submission is salvation," he intoned, eyes scanning the congregation before settling coldly on Mara. "To resist is to invite the well's wrath." Mara's jaw tightened. The words were chains, binding the town tighter to an ancient horror they dared not speak aloud. She met Father Rosel's gaze, steady and unyielding, a silent challenge passing between them. The days that followed saw the town fracturing beneath the surface. Whispers of dissent grew louder, fueled by Mara's questions and Lucia's secret acts of defiance. Tensions simmered in the marketplace, in the cracked alleys where mothers clutched their children tightly and men exchanged furtive glances. One blistering afternoon, Mara confronted Elias in the sun-baked town square. His weathered face was a mask of stoicism, but his eyes betrayed the burden he carried, a lifetime steeped in the dark lore of the well and the sacrifices it demanded. "Why do you let this continue?" Mara's voice cut through the still air like a blade. "How many more must vanish before we say enough?" Elias's gaze met hers, heavy with guilt and resignation. "The well demands its price," he said softly. "Without sacrifice, this land will swallow us all, but at what cost?" Mara pressed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and despair. "Our children, our souls." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant howl of the desert wind. The crowd watching held their breath, the fragile peace of Arroyo Seco shattered. That night, Mara lay awake, the weight of the day pressing on her chest like the desert's relentless heat. Doubt gnawed at her resolve, mistrust threading through her thoughts. Could she truly count on those around her? Could she lead a rebellion against a tradition so deeply rooted it seemed part of the earth itself? Yet, beneath the fear, a spark of defiance ignited. She thought of Tomas, of all the vanished children swallowed by the hollow well, and she vowed silently she would not let the darkness win. As the first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, Mara rose, determination hardening her features. The well's hunger was a shadow that stretched across Arroyo Seco, but so too was the flicker of hope. She now carried a hope that might yet fracture the town's faith and break the cycle of sacrifice. The road ahead was fraught with danger, mistrust, and heartbreak, but Mara Silva was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. The desert's thirst was unending, but so was her will to fight. The sun had just begun its slow crawl over the horizon when Mara Silva stepped out of her sparse home, the heavy heat of Arroyo Seco already pressing down with an unforgiving weight. The cracked earth beneath her worn boots whispered with dry dust, and the faint murmur of the town waking was swallowed almost immediately by the desert's vast, oppressive silence. Today, she was not alone. Beside her, Benito Cruz adjusted the brim of his wide hat, shading his weather-beaten face from the early glare. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes," Benito said quietly, voice rough like gravel. "If the Hollow One's been moving beyond the well, we'll find signs out there." Mara's eyes narrowed, the sharp sting of the morning sun reflecting off the baked ground, blurring the lines of the distant horizon. She swallowed hard. The thirst gnawed at her throat, a dry ache that went beyond the physical. It was hunger and longing entwined, a craving born of something far darker than mere dehydration. They set off toward the outskirts of town, where the cracked earth gave way to sparse scrub and scattered stones. Mara's heart thudded unevenly as she scanned the terrain, searching for any trace of where the children might have wandered or been taken. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, a whisper that seemed to curl around the silence like smoke. Benito stopped suddenly, crouching beside a cluster of withered flowers, their once vibrant petals now brittle and blackened. "Not natural," he muttered, fingertips brushing the dry stems with reverence and fear. Mara's vision flickered. For a moment, the desert seemed to pulse with shadows, children's laughter echoing faintly on the wind, an eerie chorus that twisted the already suffocating heat into something almost tangible. The flowers felt like a warning, a circle marking a boundary between the living and the lost. "The Hollow One," Mara whispered, her voice barely more than breath. "It's spreading." Benito's gaze darkened. "And it's hungry." The sun rose higher, and the heat waves shimmered like ghosts above the earth. Mara felt her throat tighten, the dry crackle of her breath sounding too loud in her ears. Every step became heavier, as if the desert itself sought to drain her strength. Hallucinations teased the edges of her vision, dry wells stretching endlessly into darkness, hollow eyes staring back from the void beneath the sand. "You all right?" Benito's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Mara forced a nod, blinking rapidly. "I have to keep going." For Tomas, they pressed onward, the landscape a cruel mirror of the town's own desperation. The motif of thirst, the relentless craving for life, had twisted into a monstrous hunger that consumed hope and sanity alike. As evening fell, they found refuge near a cracked ravine, the firelight casting long shadows on Benito's lined face. Stars pierced the black sky, cold and indifferent. The desert wind carried distant, unearthly whispers that promised salvation yet hinted at doom. Mara lay back on the rough ground, the weight of the day settling into her bones. The Hollow One's presence was no longer a distant legend. It was a creeping reality, twisting and distorting everything she knew. "We're not just fighting for Tomas," she murmured into the night air. "We're fighting for this town, for everyone." Benito nodded solemnly. "And the desert doesn't forget. Neither should we." The fire crackled and the shadows danced. Somewhere beneath the endless sky, the well's hunger waited. Mara's eyes closed, but sleep eluded her. The thirst gnawed at her, relentless and unforgiving, pulling her deeper into a darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. Tomorrow, the search would continue, but tonight, the desert held its breath, and so did she. The well's hunger was growing, and so was Mara's resolve. The light filtering through the narrow window was weak and dusty, casting long, trembling shadows across the cramped room where Mara and Elias sat. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and the dry, acrid dust that seemed to cling to everything in Arroyo Seco. Mara's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the faded ink on the brittle parchment before her, the fragile script telling stories older than anyone living in the town. Elias Marquez's voice was low and measured, almost reluctant, as he spoke. These texts, passed down for generations, tell of the well's origin, not as the source of water we once believed, but as a threshold to something beyond our understanding, a darkness that feeds on life, on hope. Mara leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "The hollow one." He nodded, his weathered face creased with sorrow, a spirit born from the well's forgotten depths. "It demands sacrifice, a binding pact forged in desperation during a time when the desert's thirst nearly claimed us all. The children, they are the price." The words settled over Mara like the oppressive desert heat, thick and suffocating. She swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest. Why would the town continue this? Why accept such horror? Elias's gaze drifted to the cracked walls, as if seeking answers in their peeling paint. Fear, survival. The well's hunger is endless. Our ancestors chose sacrifice over extinction. The pact binds us still, even as we suffer the consequences. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying with it the dry, relentless whisper of the desert. Mara's thoughts drifted to Tomas, to the empty space his absence had carved into her life. The town's collective despair was etched into every face she had seen today's hollow, voices subdued, movements slow and burdened. She rose and stepped to the window, gazing out at the cracked earth of the town square. The sun beat down mercilessly, the ground shimmering with heat. Faces passed by neighbors' friends all, trapped in the same cycle of dread and resignation. Mara felt a cold isolation settle within her, a stark contrast to the burning landscape. Turning back to Elias, she grasped the ancient text tightly. "What can we do? How do we break this?" He sighed deeply, the sound heavy with years of guilt and unspoken truths. There is no easy answer. The rituals are woven into the fabric of Arroyo Seco. To break the cycle, one must confront the well's darkness itself, but such a path is perilous. Mara's resolve hardened, the fire within her eyes matching the unforgiving sun outside. "Then I will face it. For Tomas, for the children, for all of us." Elias looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear. "Be warned, Mara. The well's curse is not just a physical trap. It warps the mind, feeding on despair and doubt. To confront it is to risk losing yourself." The room seemed to close in around them, the flickering candlelight casting monstrous shapes on the walls. Mara swallowed down the rising tide of fear and nodded. "I'm ready." As the night deepened, Mara stayed with Elias, absorbing every fragment of knowledge they could uncover. The ancient texts spoke of rituals long forgotten by most, but still etched into the town's collective memory. They revealed the well not as a mere hole in the earth, but a gateway, a hunger that thirsted for more than water. Outside, the desert was silent, save for the distant howl of the wind and the occasional creak of dry wood. Mara's mind raced with the implications of the curse, the weight of the town's sacrifices, and the price her own family might be destined to pay. The knowledge isolated her further from the townsfolk, many of whom preferred ignorance or denial to the harsh truths she now carried. Whispers followed her in the streets, eyes averted when she passed. Fear had woven a veil of silence and suspicion around her. Yet, beneath the isolation, a fierce determination burned. Mara understood that only by confronting the darkness beneath Arroyo Seco could she hope to save Tomas, and perhaps shatter the cycle that had claimed so many. She spent the remainder of the night preparing, her thoughts a whirl of strategy and dread. The well's curse was a living thing, an endless thirst that gnawed at the soul. To face it would demand every ounce of courage she possessed. As dawn approached, the first pale light of morning touched the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. Mara closed the ancient book, the fragile pages whispering secrets she could never unhear. Outside, Arroyo Seco stirred, the town bound by fear and fatalism. But within Mara, a flicker of hope took root, a promise to confront the darkness, no matter the cost. The journey ahead was uncertain, the path shrouded in shadow and despair. Yet Mara Silva, with steely resolve and a heart aching for her lost brother, stepped forward into the unforgiving desert sun, ready to unearth the secrets beneath the dust and face the Hollow One itself. The well awaited, and Mara would answer its call. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that bled into the parched earth of Arroyo Seco. Mara Silva stood rigid at the edge of the hollow well, the dry stone rim rough beneath her fingertips, her breath shallow and ragged. The desert wind carried a chorus of whispers, a susurrus that danced just beyond comprehension, a language of shadows and dust. She blinked, trying to steady herself, but the fleeting shapes in the corner of her vision refused to vanish. The well, a yawning maw of forgotten depths, seemed alive, its emptiness brimming with a hunger that gnawed at the edges of her sanity. Behind her, the town lay steeped in its usual silence, the oppressive heat muting even the cicada song. The annual disappearance of children had cast a pall heavier than the sun's relentless blaze. Mara's thoughts churned, haunted by Tomas's absence, the vacant space where his bright eyes once glimmered with innocent curiosity. She had chased rumors, faced whispered warnings, and now stood poised at the precipice of something beyond mortal comprehension. Earlier that day, she had sought out Elias Marquez, the town elder whose knowledge was as ancient and brittle as the desert itself. Inside his weathered home, the air stale with dust and secrets, Mara sifted through fragile parchments. The brittle pages crackled under her trembling fingers, their faded ink tracing forgotten rites and eldritch invocations. Elias sat across from her, his face carved by years of guilt and reluctant stewardship. His eyes, sun-bleached and weary, bore the weight of countless sacrifices, the town's sins etched into his soul. "The well is not what it seems," Elias murmured, voice heavy with warning. "It feeds on more than water. It drinks from our fear, our desperation. Each child taken is a thread in the web that binds us all." Mara's heart pounded. But why? Why must they suffer? Why must Tomas? Elias's gaze faltered. Because the Hollow One demands sustenance. It is the thirst that never quenches, the hunger that no offering can satisfy. Outside, the desert sun waned, shadows lengthening and twisting like living things. Mara returned home under a sky bruised with twilight, the air thick with foreboding. Sleep eluded her. Instead, she was seized by restless visions. The well's darkness stretched infinitely, a void swallowing light and hope alike. She heard Tomas's laughter, distant and distorted, mingling with the whispering wind. Faces flickered children she had never known, lost to the abyss. And through it all, the Hollow One's gaze burned like a pitiless star, hollow eyes promising oblivion. Her waking moments blurred with dreams, reality and nightmare entwining in a suffocating embrace. She found herself questioning her own mind, trembling on the edge of madness. The townsfolk, sensing her unraveling, recoiled with fearful murmurs. The fragile veneer of community cracked under the weight of dread and suspicion. In the town square, Mara's defiance sparked confrontation. Faces twisted with fear and superstition confronted her, voices rising like dust devils in the scorching heat. "Leave the well be," an old woman hissed, eyes wild. "It is our protector, our curse." Mara met their fear with steel. "It's a monster, hiding in our silence. We can end this." The crowd's anger simmered, a volatile brew of desperation and denial. But beneath the fury lay a trembling hoper, fragile flicker. Mara clung to amidst the gathering storm. That night, as the desert settled into uneasy quiet, Mara stood once more by the hollow well. The darkness beneath seemed to pulse, alive and waiting. She knew the path ahead was treacherous, the boundary between the physical world and the abyss thinning. The Hollow One's insatiable hunger pressed close, threatening to consume her hope and sanity alike. Yet, despite the terror, Mara's resolve burned brighter. She would walk the edge of madness, face the void, and fight for Tomas, for the children swallowed by the desert's dark heart. The well's hunger was endless, but so was her will to survive. The desert night whispered promises and threats, the shadows shifting, waiting for the inevitable descent. And Mara Silva was ready to step into the darkness. The desert wind howled softly, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and ancient secrets. Mara's pulse quickened as the sun's last rays slipped away, leaving Arroyo Seco cloaked in an oppressive twilight. The well, hollow and silent, beckoned a dark altar poised between life and oblivion. With every breath, Mara felt the boundary between her world and something far older, far darker, begin to dissolve. The edge of madness had never felt so close. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Arroyo Seco, the heat shimmering over cracked earth and faded adobe walls. Mara Silva moved quickly through the narrow alleys of the town, her heart pounding beneath the weight of the day's mounting dread. Beside her, Lucia Torres kept pace, her slender frame tense, eyes darting nervously toward the gathering crowd near the hollow well. "Are you sure about this?" Mara whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant murmur of preparations. Lucia nodded, biting her lip. "I can't let them take any more children. Not this summer. Not Tomas." Mara's gaze hardened, the memory of her brother's disappearance, a fresh wound beneath her skin. The well, that yawning pit of endless darkness, loomed ahead, a silent sentinel to the town's darkest secret. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage and the sharp temps of sweat. Townsfolk gathered in a tight circle around the well, their faces etched with a mixture of fear, resignation, and something far more sinister. A low chant began, rising slowly like a tide, ancient and relentless. Elias Marquez stepped forward, his weathered face illuminated by flickering flames set in clay braziers. His voice, rough and commanding, wove the incantation that bound the town to its cursed ritual. Mara felt the oppressive weight of the moment press down on her, as if the very air conspired to suffocate hope. Lucia reached out, gripping Mara's arm. "We have to act now, before it's too late." Before Mara could respond, a sharp voice cut through the chant. "Enough." Father Rosells emerged from the crowd, his priestly robes stained with dust and sweat. His eyes, cold and unyielding, fixed on Mara with a mixture of disdain and warning. "This folly must end," Mara said, stepping forward despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. "We don't have to surrender to this darkness." The crowd fell silent, the chant dying on trembling lips. Elias's gaze flicked between Mara and Father Rosells, the tension crackling like static in the heavy air. "Faith is our shield," the priest intoned, voice rising with fervor. "The well demands its due, and we are bound to obey. To defy is to invite ruin." Mara's voice grew stronger, fueled by desperation and the fire of rebellion. "What if the well is no savior, but a monster feeding on our children's lives? We've lost too many already." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some faces hardening with anger, others flickering with doubt. Lucia's secret efforts to protect the children had been uncovered, and the fragile veil of silence was torn asunder. Elias's shoulders sagged with the weight of years and guilt. "The price is steep, but it has kept us alive." Alive, Mara's voice cracked with bitter irony, or trapped in fear and death. A sudden gust swept through the circle, the desert wind carrying faint whispers that seemed to rise from the well's dark mouth. Mara's eyes locked onto the abyss, where shadows danced and shifted like living things. The voices of vanished children echoed faintly, a haunting lament that stirred something deep within her. "That hunger won't be sated by sacrifice alone," Mara whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "But it can be challenged." The crowd's chant faltered, a flicker of defiance sparking amidst the suffocating dread. Mara knew the path forward was perilous rebellion against ancient faith and relentless darkness. Yet within the crushing heat and shadowed gaze of the well, she felt a fragile hope stir, a chance to break the cycle that had claimed so many. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over Arroyo Seco, Mara stood firm. The well's dark hunger remained, but so did her resolve. The children of the Hollow Well had not been forgotten, and neither would she be. The ritual's final moments neared, the town holding its breath. Somewhere in the depths of the well, the Hollow One waited, its endless thirst unquenched. But Mara was no longer just a frightened sister. She was a flicker of light in the darkness, ready to fight for the souls swallowed by the abyss. The chant rose again, louder, more desperate, as the circle tightened. Mara's eyes never left the well's gaping mouth. Whatever came next, the story of Arroyo Seco was being rewritten. The first words were hers. And just as the shadows began to swallow the last light of day, a sudden, chilling silence fell. The well seemed to breathe, alive with hungry darkness, as Mara stepped forward into the unknown. The air inside the small church of Arroyo Seco was thick with a mingled scent of burnt incense and dry desert dust, settling over every worn wooden pew and cracked stone surface. Mara Silva stepped cautiously beneath the low beams, feeling the oppressive weight of the place bearing down on her. The church was a refuge of sorts for many in the town, a place where faith intertwined dangerously with the dark worship of the Hollow Well at the town's heart. At the altar, Father Rosells stood clad in his faded robes, the gaunt lines of his face hidden beneath the shadow of his clerical hat. His voice was low but firm as he preached submission, weaving Christian prayers with veiled homage to the well's insatiable hunger. "We must accept the will of the well," he he intoned, "for through sacrifice we preserve our lives beneath this relentless sun." Mara's eyes narrowed. She had heard these words too often, their hollow comfort ringing false in her ears. The well did not preserve life, it devoured it, year after year, child after child. And the church, with its pious veneer, was complicit. When the service ended, Mara lingered in the dim shadows until Father Rosales was alone. Then she stepped forward, her voice sharp and unyielding. "How can you stand there preaching salvation while children vanish into that cursed well?" Father Rosales turned slowly, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Faith, Mara. Without faith, there is only despair. The well demands sacrifice. It is God's will, manifested in this place. God's will." Mara's voice rose, echoing off the cracked walls. "You use his name to justify murder, to keep us all trapped in this nightmare." The priest's gaze hardened. "You speak as if you understand, but you do not. The rituals, the sacrifices, they are the only shield we have against the desert's cruelty. The well is our covenant. To defy it is to invite oblivion." Mara's fists clenched. The church was not a beacon of hope, it was an institution of control, perpetuating the cycle of horror. "Then you are no different from the rest," she spat. "All of you, bound by fear and tradition, feeding the Hollow One's hunger." The tension thickened, the silence between them laden with accusation and unspoken truths. Finally, Father Rosales lowered his eyes and said quietly, "Be careful, Mara. There are forces in this town stronger than your will." Leaving the church, Mara's heart pounded, her anger burning but tempered by the weight of isolation she now fully embraced. The town's institutions were fortified against change, and she stood alone against a tide of fear and faith. That evening, Mara sought out Elias Marquez. The town elder's home was a clutter of ancient tomes and dusty relics, the flickering light of an oil lamp casting dancing shadows across his worn face. Elias listened as Mara recounted her confrontation. He sighed heavily, the lines of guilt etched deep. "You were right to challenge him. The church has long been an enforcer of the old ways, but rebellion comes with a price." Elias spread an aged manuscript on the table. "This tells the true story of the well's curse, a darkness born from desperation and blood sacrifice. I have kept it hidden, fearing what knowledge might bring. But you must know, the Hollow One feeds not just on children, but on our collective despair and blind faith." Mara's fingers trembled as she traced the faded script. The burden of knowledge pressed down, yet her resolve hardened. "Then I will bear that burden. I will find Tomas and end this." Outside, the desert night was cool but unwelcoming. Mara stepped into the dusty streets, the weight of the town's secrets and her own fears settling around her like the swirling sands. The crossroads of desperation lay before her, a choice between submission and defiance, between the darkness beneath and the fragile hope she carried within. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, Mara felt the faint stirrings of a rebellion that might one day break the cycle of sacrifice and silence. The well's shadow stretched long over Arroyo Seco, waiting patiently for the next summer's toll. While Mara's fight for salvation began in earnest, the sun hung oppressive and unforgiving over Arroyo Seco, its harsh light casting long, wavering shadows across the cracked earth surrounding the hollow well. Mara Silva stood at its edge, the air shimmering with heat waves that rippled like a cruel mirage. The well, once a source of life for the town, now loomed as a monument to their despair, a yawning void that seemed to swallow light and hope alike. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tightened the rope belt around her waist. the coarse fibers biting into her sun-warmed skin. The familiar scent of dust and dry sage filled her nostrils, mingling with the faint metallic temps of sweat. Every sound in the desert had fallen away to a heavy silence. No laughter from children, no distant dog barks, only the faint whisper of wind stirring the brittle remains of dead leaves and sand. Mara's dark eyes scanned the circle of cracked earth beneath her feet, the jagged edges of the well's mouth like the gaping maw of some ancient beast. Tomas's absence was a constant ache in her chest, a hollow that no amount of determination could fully fill. Yet here she was, standing on the precipice, physically and spiritually, of the abyss that had claimed so many before him. Behind her, the faint crunch of footsteps signaled the arrival of her companions. Lucia Torres approached, her slender frame wrapped in a worn shawl, eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. Benito Cruz, the rugged tracker with a steady gaze hardened by years in the desert, carried a coil of spare rope and a small pack of provisions. Elias Marquez, the town elder, followed slowly, his weathered face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen countless summers. Inside Ilias's small, dust-filled chamber earlier that evening, the weight of forbidden knowledge pressed down on Mara like the desert sun itself. Ancient texts, yellowed and brittle, lay sprawled across the rough wooden table, their faded script whispering secrets that had been buried beneath generations of silence. Ilias's voice had been low and cautious as he recounted fragments of lore, tales of the Hollow One, the dark deity born from the well's forgotten waters, sustained by the town's sacrifices and insatiable thirst. The well is not just a hollow in the earth, Elias had said, eyes clouded with guilt. It is a gateway, a hunger that grows with every child taken. We have fed it for centuries in the hope of survival, but the price is more than we can bear. Mara absorbed the weight of his words, her resolve hardening even as dread coiled tighter within her. She had come to know the cost of silence and blind faith, the way it twisted a community until fear was the only currency left. Yet knowledge alone was not enough. She had to act. She had to descend. Lucia stepped forward now, pressing a small, worn talisman into Mara's palm, a fragile symbol of protection, hope caught between threads of leather and silver. The faint scent of desert sage clung to it, a whispered prayer against the darkness below. "You are not alone," Lucia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stand with you, even if the town fears what you do." Benito's steady gaze met Mara's, silently offering the strength of a tracker who knew the desert's cruel secrets and the unforgiving nature of shadows. With a final, steadying breath, Mara anchored the rope to a sturdy, sun-baked post and began her descent. The first few feet were lit by the dying glow of the evening sky. But as she lowered herself deeper into the well, the light surrendered to an all-encompassing blackness. The walls closed in, cold and damp, their rough texture scraping against her arms as the howl of the desert faded into a suffocating silence. Her ears strained for sound, the drip of water, the faint rustle of unseen movement, but there was only the echo of her own breaths and the scrape of rope against stone. The air grew thick, heavy with an ancient hunger that seemed to draw the moisture from her lungs and the hope from her heart. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, shadowy figures of children lost to the abyss. The endless thirst of the desert made flesh in the form of the Hollow One, its formless shadow shifting and writhing in the void. Mara clenched her jaw, fighting the creeping madness that sought to claim her mind as surely as the well had claimed her brother. Each footstep downward was a battle, not just against the physical challenge of the descent, but against the darkness that whispered lies and promises of oblivion. She gripped the rope tighter, her muscles burning, mind racing through memories of Tomas's laughter and the desperate hope that had driven her here. The town above was a distant memory now, swallowed by the oppressive silence and the endless black. Mara's journey into the abyss had begun, a descent not only into the physical depths of the well, but into the heart of the curse itself. The embodiment of thirst, sacrifice, and blind faith awaited her below, and with every inch she lowered herself, the line between reality and nightmare blurred further. The desert sun faded completely, the cool night air never reaching this deep. Mara's movement slowed as the rope's end approached. The unknown stretched before her like an endless void, a silent challenge and a cruel promise. She would face the Hollow One. She would confront the darkness that had haunted Arroyo Seco for generations. And she would fight, not just for Tomas, but for the fragile hope of breaking the cycle that had bound her town in suffocating dread. But as the blackness closed around her, Mara could not shake the question that clawed at her mind. Was she descending into salvation, or into a tomb from which no one ever returned? The rope creaked softly beneath her weight, the last vestige of light slipping away, and Mara Silva stepped fully into the abyss. The silence was absolute. Then the darkness seemed to pulse, alive, hungry, waiting, and Mara listened, ready to meet the horror that awaited. The entrance to the well yawned before Mara like the mouth of some ancient beast, cracked stones crumbling at her feet as the desert's relentless sun finally gave way to a cavernous darkness. The air shifted instantly, the scorching heat replaced by a biting chill that clawed at her skin. A phantom thirst gnawing deeper than any physical dryness she had ever known. She hesitated only a moment before stepping over the threshold, the scent of damp earth mixed with decay pressing against her senses, as if the well itself exhaled a breath of forgotten despair. Her footsteps echoed hollowly in the cavern below, swallowed quickly by the enveloping shadows. The walls, jagged, slick, with unseen moisture, seemed to pulse faintly, as though the very rock throbbed with the heartbeats of the abyss. Mara's breath came in short gasps, the air thick and heavy, each inhale tasting like dust and rusted iron. She reached out, fingers brushing the cold stone, and the darkness seemed to cling to her skin like a living thing. As she ventured deeper, the geometry of the well betrayed her senses. Angles warped and stretched, corridors splitting and folding back upon themselves in impossible loops. The air grew dense with whispers, faint at first, like the sighing desert wind, then swelling into a chorus of murmurs, each thread weaving into a tapestry of sorrow and hunger. The voices spoke in forgotten tongues, ancient prayers of sacrifice and despair that clawed at Mara's mind. A sudden flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow darting just beyond sight, and her heart slammed against her ribs. She called out softly, "Tomas." The silence answered with a hollow, mocking echo. The darkness seemed to press closer, an entity breathing with insatiable thirst, its presence a suffocating weight that threatened to crush her spirit. Visions surged unbidden. She saw Tomas's wide, innocent eyes reflected in the obsidian depths, twisted by fear and desperation. Memories of the town's rituals flickered like dying embers, faces twisted in trance, hands raised in solemn offering, the silent acceptance of a terrible fate. The Hollow One's eyes, infinite pits of darkness, shimmered at the edge of her vision, beckoning and threatening all at once. Mara's hands trembled as the hallucinations turned venomous, whispers turning to screams, shadows stretching into grotesque shapes that lunged and recoiled. Her mind teetered on the edge of collapse, the abyss promising oblivion with every step. Yet beneath the terror, a fierce flame burned, a stubborn, desperate hope that she clung to with every ounce of will. She forced herself onward, voice cracking but resolute. "Tomas, I'm coming, hold on." The sound of her own words steadied her, a fragile lifeline in the consuming void. The well's hunger pulsed around her, an unyielding tide of thirst and sacrifice. But Mara's determination flared brighter than the darkness. With each step she took, the abyss whispered secrets of despair and ancient power. But Mara pressed deeper, the boundary between reality and nightmare blurring, until the dreadful presence of the Hollow One became undeniable. It was no longer a distant shadow, but a suffocating storm, a being born of the desert's unquenchable thirst and the town's sacrificial blood. In the heart of the abyss, Mara knew the fight for Tomas's life and her own sanity was just beginning. The well was not merely a pit of forgotten water and broken hope. It was a living maw that demanded the ultimate price, and she was ready to pay it, no matter the cost. The darkness seemed to pulse in anticipation, as if the abyss itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. Mara's eyes, sharp and unyielding, pierced the void, a beacon of defiance against the endless hunger that sought to claim her. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, though the truth was a tangled knot of fear and courage. "And I will find you, Tomas." The shadows shifted once more, the abyss responding, a silent challenge cast in darkness. As Mara stepped forward into the unknown, the first tremors of the coming battle echoing through the void beneath Arroyo Seco, her journey into the abyss was far from over. The air within the abyss was thick, oppressive, and suffocating, as though the darkness itself had substance, clutching at Mara's skin with icy fingers. Her every breath came ragged, shallow, each inhale a struggle against the choking void that threatened to consume both body and mind. The distant echoes of children's cries drifted through the cavernous blackness, their mournful wails weaving a tapestry of sorrow and dread that surrounded her like a living thing. It was not just sound. It was a presence, a palpable sorrow that seeped into her bones. Mara's fingers brushed against the rough stone walls, slick with dampness that was more illusion than reality here. The abyss seemed to bleed memories. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm to match the rising tide of visions that began to press behind her eyelids. The darkness flickered and shifted, and suddenly spectral images bloomed around her like ghostly murals painted in shades of despair. She saw the faces of children long vanished, their eyes wide with fear and innocence betrayed. They were frozen in moments of terrible sacrifice, small hands reaching out, voices stifled by heavy silence. Elders cloaked in ritual garb moved with solemn purpose, their faces hidden behind cracked masks, chanting prayers that twisted into curses. The well, once a source of life, now pulsed sickly with a black, viscous liquid that ebbed and flowed like a heartbeat of darkness. The Hollow One emerged from the shadows of these visions, a formless shape shifting with impossible fluidity. Its endless ice bits of despair absorbed all light, all hope. Mara felt its hunger, an insatiable thirst that gnawed at the edges of her sanity, whispering promises of oblivion should she choose to surrender. The entity's voice slithered through her mind, cold and relentless, a siren song of nothingness that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of her resolve. Pain lanced through Mara's temples as the visions intensified, each image more vivid, more wrenching than the last. She saw the town's forgotten past laid bare, the origins of the Hollow One intertwined. With desperate acts of faith and sacrifice, the price exacted in innocent blood. The desert's parched earth was not merely a backdrop, but a crucible where hope was smelted into despair. Her mind threatened to fracture under the ceaseless onslaught, a tempest of memories and fears that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. The well's hunger was a living curse, a cycle of loss and submission etched into the very soul of Arroyo Seco. Yet within the depths of her torment, a spark endured a fierce flame of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Summoning every ounce of strength, Mara clenched her fists, the nails biting into her palms as she forced herself to breathe, to focus. Her eyes, sharp and burning with determination, pierced the darkness. She would not yield. Tomas was still out there, lost in the shadows, and she would find him. She would break the cycle, no matter the cost. The abyss around her seemed to pulse in response, the darkness recoiling from her will, even as it sought to engulf her. Mara took a tentative step forward, then another, each one a battle against the despair that clawed at her heart. The visions faded, replaced by the cold, unyielding silence of the well's endless depths. As she pressed onward, Mara felt the weight of the past lift slightly, the heavy shroud of the town's sins momentarily parted by her resolve. But the journey was far from over. Ahead awaited the core of the curse, the heart of the Hollow One's hunger, a confrontation that would test the limits of her courage and sanity. Yet, even in the darkest of places, a fragile hope flickered. The air turned viscous, thickening with the suffocating weight of the abyss, as Mara took a hesitant step forward. Her senses, dulled by the endless blackness, strained to catch any sign of life or death lurking in the depths below. Arroyo Seco, the faint echoes of dripping water, impossibly distant, mingled with the whispering silence that seemed to seep from the very walls of the well. Suddenly, a ripple of shadows stirred ahead, coalescing into an amorphous form that defied definition. It pulsed and shifted, a living absence of light that chilled Mara to her core. Two deep pits of darkness manifested where eyes might have been, drawing in the feeble glow of her lantern and swallowing it whole. The Hollow One had revealed itself. Mara's breath hitched as she took a defensive stance. The well's curse, the whispered sacrifices, the vanished children all converged into this formless nightmare. The entity's presence was an oppressive hunger, a thirst that reached beyond flesh and bone into the very soul. It exuded a cold that burned like the desert sun, an endless craving that no sacrifice could sat. The shadow lunged, tendrils unfurling like sinuous serpents made of night. They twisted through the air with a serpentine grace, seeking to ensnare Mara's limbs and drag her into oblivion. She dodged with desperate agility, her heartbeat roaring in her ears louder than the silence around her. The acrid scent of dust and decay clung to the creature, mingling with the metallic tang of fear rising in her throat. Her hands trembled as she gripped the relic she had taken from Iliazen, ancient amulet etched with faded symbols of protection. Raising it, she whispered a prayer that felt foreign on her tongue, a plea for salvation from the abyss. The Hollow One recoiled as the amulet's faint glow cast fragile light into the darkness. The tendrils writhed in agony, retreating momentarily, but the entity's hunger did not wane. It lashed out with renewed fury, battering Mara's mind with visions of the lost children laughing, crying, disappearing into the well's insatiable maw. Their faces blurred and shifted into twisted masks of despair and longing, pressing against the veil between worlds. Mara staggered, clutching her temples as the psychic assault threatened to shatter her sanity. The well's endless thirst was not just physical, it was spiritual, a void that consumed hope and replaced it with dread. She collapsed to her knees, the amulet slipping from her grasp to clatter against the jagged stones. But deep inside, a flicker of defiance kindled. Mara forced herself to breathe, to focus beyond the torment. She remembered Tomas's wide eyes, his innocent smile, the fragile hope he represented. This fight was not just for herself, but for every child swallowed by the well's darkness. Summoning every shard of strength, Mara reached down and seized the amulet once more. With a cry that echoed through the abyss, she thrust it toward the Hollow One. The light flared, splintering the shadow into writhing fragments that hissed and recoiled like wounded beasts. For a fleeting moment, the darkness faltered, and Mara glimpsed the abyss beyond. A barren desert of endless thirst, a void where faith turned to madness and sacrifice fed an eternal hunger. The well was more than a dried-up source of water, was a gateway to oblivion, a curse woven into the very fabric of Arroyo. The Hollow One's eyes burned with renewed intensity, promising that this battle was far from over. As the shadow dissolved into the dark corners of the abyss, Mara rose unsteady but unbroken. The fight had revealed the true nature of the entity and the terrifying cost of hope. She knew now that to save Tomas, she must confront not only the darkness beneath, but the blind faith above. The well's hunger was endless, but so was her determination. And as she climbed from the abyss, the oppressive silence of the well whispered a chilling promise. The children were not gone, they were waiting. Mara's eyes burned with a new fire, even as the shadows clung to her like a second skin. The Hollow One had been revealed, but the story was far from over. Somewhere in the darkness, her brother waited, and so did the next sacrifice. The battle had begun. The darkness was suffocating, an oppressive void that pressed against Mara's skin like the desert's relentless heat clinging to parched earth. Every breath she took was thick, dry, as if the very air had been drained of moisture, leaving only dust and despair to fill her lungs. The abyss beneath Arroyo Seco was no mere hole in the ground. It was a living maw, an endless pit that seemed to drink hope as voraciously as it devoured children. Mara's hands trembled as she felt the rough stone beneath her fingers. Fragments of the well's ancient walls crumbling into dust under her grip. The faintest glimmer of light from her flickering lantern cast monstrous shadows that writhed and shifted, twisting into forms that defied logic. And then, from the depths of that darkness, the Hollow One emerged, an amorphous shadow, its edges fluid and restless, eyes twin abysses that seemed to suck in all light and warmth. A cold dread surged through Mara's veins, a primal fear that clawed at the edges of her sanity. The Hollow One's presence felt like a physical weight pressing down, crushing her spirit with its insatiable thirst. It was the embodiment of everything the well demanded: sacrifice, hunger, oblivion. The entity was not simply a beast. It was a force of nature, a curse woven into the very fabric of the town's existence. Yet Mara stood her ground, every muscle coiled with tension. The weight of Tomas's absence burned like a brand on her heart, fueling a fierce resolve that blazed through the consuming darkness. She would not let the well claim her brother, not without a fight. The Hollow One shifted, its form undulating like smoke caught in a violent wind. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow, each one seeking to ensnare Mara's limbs and drag her into the abyss. She dodged and weaved, the jagged edges of the wells, stone scraping her skin as she moved, pain a distant echo compared to the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. In a desperate bid, Mara seized a shard of the broken well stone, its rough edges cold but solid in her hand. She swung it blindly, striking the shadowy tendrils with a crackling burst of ethereal light. The Hollow One recoiled, a soundless scream rippling through the void that reverberated in Mara's bones. Amidst the chaos, A sudden vision pierced Mara's mind, a fleeting glimpse of the children who had vanished over the years. Pale, translucent figures hovered just beyond the shadows, their faces etched with silent screams and eyes wide with unending fear. They reached out to her, beseeching, their presence a haunting reminder of the cost of the town's survival. Mara's heart clenched with a sorrow so deep it threatened to shatter her. But with that pain came a steely determination. She would not let their fate be hers or Tomas's. The shard in her hand became a symbol of fragile hope, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The battle raged on, a brutal dance of shadow and light. The Hollow One lashed out with renewed fury, its thirst manifesting as a corrosive dryness that sucked the moisture from Mara's skin and filled her mouth with dust. Her vision blurred, and a choking dryness gripped her throat, threatening to extinguish her last breath. But through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Mara's thoughts anchored on Tomas. She imagined his small, sun-bleached hair and wide, innocent eyes, how he had always been drawn to the well's edge, fascinated and unaware of the darkness beneath. Clutching the shard tighter, she pushed forward, a surge of protective love burning through her like wildfire. The Hollow One shuddered, as if sensing the strength of her resolve. Its form flickered, unstable for the first time, and Mara seized the moment. With a cry that echoed through the abyss, she drove the shard deep into the shadowy mass. The entity screamed in silence, a wave of darkness rippling outward before it began to retreat, dissolving into the void from which it had come. Gasping for breath, Mara collapsed beside a small figure curled against the cold stone floor. Tomas. His eyes fluttered open, wide with confusion but alive. Relief crashed over Mara in a tidal wave, mingling with exhaustion and the bitter knowledge that the cost of survival was far from over. As she gathered Tomas in her arms, the chilling truth settled over her like the desert night. The well's hunger was eternal, its thirst never quenched. The sacrifice demanded would continue, and the town remained trapped in its relentless cycle. Yet within Mara, a fragile ember of hope took hold. She had faced the abyss and emerged bearing the scars of battle and sorrow, but unbroken. The fight to end the curse was just beginning. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the hollow streets of Arroyo Seco, carrying with it the faintest echo of children's laughter, a sound both innocent and haunted, a reminder of what was lost and what might yet be saved. And in the depths below, the well waited, silent and hungry. The struggle was far from over, but Mara Silva had made her stand. The air within the well was thick and suffocating, a black void pressing against Mara's lungs like the weight of centuries. Every breath tasted of dust and despair. The silence around her, a heavy shroud broken only by the faint, uneven breaths of Tomas nestled against her chest. His small, trembling body was fragile beneath her arms, sun-bleached hair matted with dirt, eyes wide but dulled by fear. Mara's heart pounded fiercely, a relentless rhythm that anchored her to this nightmare. They had descended into the abyss together, but now the task was to escape it. The darkness shifted, as if alive, a living shadow curling and twisting beyond the edges of her vision. The Hollow One's presence was a suffocating force, an insatiable hunger that clawed at the edges of her sanity. Yet Mara's resolve burned stronger. "Hold on, Tomas," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I won't let it take you." Their path was treacherous, the air growing colder and heavier with each step upward. Mara fought against the creeping panic, the hallucinations that whispered of endless thirst and sacrifice. Images of vanished children flickered in her mind's eye, their hollow gazes imploring her to flee or surrender. But surrender was a luxury she could not afford. Tomas's frail grip on her wrist was a lifeline, a tether to the world she refused to lose. As they climbed, the oppressive darkness began to yield to a faint, distant lighter promise of release. The walls of the well, slick and unyielding, seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a heartbeat in the abyss that threatened to trap them forever. Mara's muscles ached, her breath ragged, but the sight of that light fueled her every exhausted step. Finally, they broke through the final barrier and emerged into the blinding desert sun. Mara blinked fiercely, the harsh light searing her retinas, the oppressive heat washing over her like a physical force. Tomas whimpered softly, clutching her hand with renewed strength. Around them, the town of Arroyo Seco lay silent and still, the familiar cracked earth shimmering under the relentless sun. Mara's knees buckled, sand shifting beneath her as she sank to the ground, Tomas cradled protectively against her. The well stood behind them, a dried-up monument to dread and sacrifice. Its dark hunger momentarily sated, but never quelled. The air was thick with unspoken fear, the town's fatalism palpable even in the glaring light. When they returned to her modest home, the dim glow of a flickering candle cast long, trembling shadows across the walls. Mara gently cleaned Tomas's scrapes and bruises, her hands steady despite the turmoil within. The silence between them was profound, broken only by the occasional shallow breath or the soft scrape of cloth against skin. Their eyes met, reflecting a shared understanding of horrors endured and battles yet to come. "We're not safe yet," Mara murmured, voice tight with emotion. "But I promise, Tomas, I'll find a way to stop this, to end it." Tomas nodded weakly, his innocence battered but unbroken. Mara's gaze hardened, the weight of knowledge and sorrow settling heavily upon her shoulders. The curse of the well was no longer a distant myth, it was a living nightmare she had touched and escaped, forever changed. At dawn, Mara stood alone at the edge of the town square. The well's hollow maw yawned before her, a silent sentinel beneath the scorching sun. Around her, Arroyo Seco stirred, steeped in the same ritualistic dread that had claimed so many children before Tomas. Her fists clenched at her sides, knuckles white against sunburned skin. The desert wind whispered through the cracked earth, carrying faint echoes of laughter and loss. She took a deep breath, steady and resolute. "This ends now," she vowed aloud, voice cutting through the morning stillness. No more sacrifice, no more hunger. But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the parched earth, Mara knew the battle had only just begun. The Hollow One's hunger was a force older than memory, nourished by fear and blind faith. Breaking the cycle meant facing an abyss not only beneath the town, but within its very soul. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the horizon where the desert met the sky. Somewhere beyond the heat and dust lay the answers and, perhaps, salvation. For Mara Silva, the path forward was as uncertain as the desert winds, but her will was ironclad. She would fight, even if it meant becoming a part of the darkness she sought to destroy. The well remained, silent and waiting. The children's disappearances would continue in shadow, for now. But Mara's vow was a flicker of defiance in the suffocating dread, a fragile hope that perhaps, one day, the hollow hunger could be stilled. And in the silence of the desert, that hope was all she had left. The sun hung low over Arroyo Seco, casting long, merciless shadows across the cracked earth. Mara Silva's boots crunched against the dry soil as she stepped back into the town she had fled, with nothing but hope and horror in her heart. The heat was oppressive, pressing down like a living weight, and the hollow well at the town center seemed to watch her arrival with indifferent menace. The well, stripped of water but swollen with dark legend, stood as a scar in the bright desert light, a monument to a curse that had claimed to many children. Mara's eyes narrowed as she scanned the familiar yet alien streets. Faces turned toward her with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and muted fear. Whispers rippled like wind through brittle leaves. She had changed. The descent into the abyss had left its mark, not just on her body, but on her mind. The town's fatalism, once a distant murmur, now felt like a wall she needed to break through. At her mother's home, Mara found Isabel Vega waiting, her face etched with worry and relief. The reunion was quiet, the air thick with unspoken grief. "You came back," Isabel said softly, her voice trembling. "We prayed for you every day." She reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed Mara's hair back. Mara's gaze faltered, the weight of all she had witnessed threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm here," she whispered. "But it's not over. Tomas, the well. I saw what lies beneath. It's hungry still." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "This town has survived for generations. We do what we must." Mara shook her head, a fierce flame igniting within. "Survived or trapped. We can't keep sacrificing our children. I won't let this continue." The days that followed were a blur of cautious steps and whispered conversations. Mara sought out Lucia Torres under the shade of the lone mesquite tree at the dusty crossroads, where the air was thick with heat and tension. "They won't listen," Lucia said, her hands wringing nervously. "Most have accepted the well's hunger as fate. But I believe you, Mara. Tomas could have been my brother." Benito Cruz stood nearby, his rugged features set in grim determination. The desert doesn't forgive weakness, but maybe it respects courage. Together, they began to weave plans, fragile threads of resistance amid the town's entrenched silence. Mara's presence stirred old fears and new hopes alike. Some townsfolk watched from shadowed doorways, their faces tight with worry or scorn. Each evening, Mara found herself drawn to the well's edge as dusk bled into night. The fading light seemed to awaken the dark moor, pulsing faintly as if alive. The air was thick with the scent of dust, dried earth, and something deeper and ancient hunger that whispered in the wind. Standing there, Mara felt the weight of countless vanished children and the enduring curse pressed down on her soul. She clenched her fists, resolve hardening like the cracked stones beneath her feet. "This ends," she vowed into the gathering darkness. Yet, as the stars blinked coldly overhead, the desert held its breath, watching, waiting. The echoes of the hollow well whispered promises and threats alike. The nightmare was far from over. Mara's return had ignited a spark, but the path ahead was shadowed and uncertain. The town's fate and her own, balanced on a knife's edge where hope and despair waged a silent war beneath the unforgiving sun. The sun scorched the cracked earth of Arroyo Seco with an unforgiving blaze, turning the town into a furnace where shadows fled and whispers became desperate prayers. Mara Silva stood in the back room of La Serena, the cantina she and Lucia frequented since childhood. The air inside was thick with dust and the heavy scent of stale beer and sweat, but under the dim light, the room offered a fragile refuge from the relentless desert heat. Lucia sat across from her, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her blouse. Benito Cruz leaned against the wall, his rifle resting beside him, eyes sharp and scanning the street beyond the cracked windows. Their voices were low, urgent, as they discussed the impossible, rallying the fractured town against the rituals that had claimed so many children, including Mara's brother. "We can't keep hiding," Mara said, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. "People are scared, but they need to know there's another way. We can't let the Hollow One keep feeding on us like this." Lucia nodded, though her eyes flickered with doubt. "Some will listen, but many are too afraid. Father Ocels and Elias hold too much sway. They've convinced most that the sacrifices are necessary, that defiance means death for us all." Benito's voice was gravelly, shaped by years tracking game through the merciless desert. "Fear is a powerful weapon, but it's not invincible. We've seen crack small ones, but real. We just have to push harder, make the town remember what it means to hope." Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly, painting the world in harsh light that revealed every wrinkle in the weathered faces of the townsfolk. Mara's mind raced with memories of Thomas, his sun-bleached hair and wide eyes, drawn inexplicably to the well's edge. That innocent curiosity had led him to the abyss. Now, that same abyss threatened to swallow them all. The next morning, Mara, Lucia, and Benito moved through the town like shadows themselves, gathering whispers of dissent. In the cracked streets and under the awnings of shuttered shops, small groups huddled, their conversations laced with fear and hope. The desert wind carried the scent of dust and desperation, mingling with the faint murmur of the well's dark legend. But the town was a tinderbox, and it didn't take long for sparks to ignite. At midday, the square became a battleground of voices. Loyalists to the old ways, draped in sun-bleached robes and clutching talismans, confronted those emboldened by Mara's message. Shouts echoed against adobe walls, accusations flying like arrows in the dry air. "You would condemn us all." Elias's voice boomed, his weathered face flushed with anger. "The well has sustained Arroyo Seco for generations. Without sacrifice, we perish, or we perish because of it." Mara shot back, eyes blazing. "How many more children must vanish before you see the truth? Tomasi was one of us, and now he's gone." The crowd's murmur grew into a cacophony of fear and defiance. The desert heat pressed down, suffocating, as if the earth itself weighed on their souls. Some stepped back, unwilling to break the cycle. Others, inspired by Mara's courage, stepped forward. In the midst of the chaos, Father Roselles appeared, his gaunt figure framed by the sun's glare. "Peace," he called, voice thin but commanding. "This conflict serves the Hollow One. We must trust in the path laid out for us." His words were a venomous reminder of the institutional power that upheld the rituals. Mara's heart clenched, knowing the fight was far from over. As dusk fell, Mara found herself walking alone along the dried riverbed, the cracked earth crunching beneath her boots. The sun dipped behind jagged hills, casting the desert in a bruised palette of purples and oranges. The silence was profound, broken only by the whispering wind that carried with it the scent of sage and forgotten promises. She closed her eyes, the weight of the day pressing down like the desert sky. Doubt gnawed at her resolve. Could she truly rally a town so steeped in fear and superstition? Or was she destined to become another lost soul, swallowed by the well's insatiable hunger? But beneath the doubt, a small ember of hope kindled. Tomas's face, bright and innocent, flashed in her mind. She could not let his light be extinguished in vain. Later, beneath a star-studded sky, Mara, Lucia, and Benito convened with a handful of allies in the shadow of a mesquite tree. A single lantern flickered between them, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach out toward the endless darkness beyond. Plans were whispered, strategies formed. Each voice carried the weight of desperation and the fragile hope of change. The desert stretched boundless around them, a vast silent witness to their rebellion. "We may not win tomorrow," Benito said quietly, "but every step forward is a crack in the old way." Mara nodded, feeling the first true flicker of resolve in days. "Then we make those cracks into a chasm, for Tomás, for all the children." As the night deepened, the desert held its breath alongside them. The well's dark hunger waited below, but above, beneath the indifferent stars, a fragile defiance took root. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Arroyo Seco, its relentless heat a cruel reminder of the town's parched spirit. Mara Silva stood at the cracked edge of the town square, the dried-up well looming behind her like a silent sentinel of dread. Around her, the townsfolk moved with a mixture of fear and resignation, their whispered prayers to the hollow well blending with the dry wind that swept through the streets. Beside Mara, Lucia Torres shifted nervously, her dark eyes darting toward the shadows that clung to the corners of the square. "We can't keep waiting," Mara said, her voice low but firm. "If we don't act soon, more children will vanish. Tomás, he's still out there, somewhere beneath the darkness." Lucia nodded, biting her lip. "I've been trying to shield the younger ones, but it's dangerous. People are watching, and the rituals are becoming more intense. The well's demands grow each day." Benito Cruz, standing a little apart, scanned the horizon with a hunter's wary gaze. His rugged face was set in grim determination. "The desert itself seems to be turning against us. The Hollow One's hunger isn't just a superstition anymore. I've seen shadows moving where no one should be. The ground whispers beneath our feet." Mara clenched her fists, the weight of their words settling like stones in her chest. "We have to find a way to break this cycle. The town is drowning in its own fear, feeding the well's hunger with every sacrifice." That evening, Mara sought out Elias Marquez in the dim confines of his home. The town elder's weathered face was etched with lines of sorrow and secrecy. Dust motes danced in the fading light as Elias pulled an ancient, leather-bound book from beneath a pile of faded manuscripts. "These texts hold the truth," Elias said, his voice heavy with years of guilt. "The sacrifices began long before any of us were born. The Hollow One is sustained by our fear, by our blind obedience. Every vanished child feeds its insatiable thirst." Mara's eyes searched his face. "Is there a way to stop it? To end this nightmare?" Elias shook his head slowly. "Breaking the curse means breaking the town. The rituals are the fragile thread holding us together. Without them, Arroyo Seco would fall into chaos and despair." A chill crawled up Mara's spine despite the desert heat. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracked windows, carrying an almost imperceptible sound, a dark presence lurking just beyond the veil of night. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Mara's dreams were invaded by the Hollow One's shifting shadows, its endless thirst consuming all light and hope. She felt its gaze in every dark corner, a suffocating dread that clung to her skin. One night, beneath a starless sky, Mara confronted one of her closest allies, the betrayal cut deeper than any wound, a knife twisting in the fragile hope she had nurtured. "You've been speaking to Father Rosales," Mara accused, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. The man's eyes flickered with guilt and fear. "I'm trying to protect you, Mara. You don't understand what you're up against. The well's hunger is beyond us all." Betrayal hung between them like the desert dust, choking and relentless. As dawn crept over the horizon, Mara stood alone by the well, the first rays of sunlight casting long, haunted shadows. The town stirred behind her, caught in the unyielding grip of tradition and fear. Yet within Mara, a flicker of defiance remained. A fragile hope that one day the children of Arroyo Seco might be free from the hollow well's terrible price. But for now, the thirst was unquenched, and the darkness waited patiently beneath the cracked earth. The battle for Arroyo Seco's soul was far from over, and Mara knew the price of hope was steep, soaked in betrayal, loss, and the ever-looming shadow of the Hollow One. The sun beat down mercilessly on Arroyo Seco, turning the cracked earth into a furnace and casting long, sharp shadows beneath the sparse desert scrub. In the town square, a restless crowd had gathered around the dried-up well, now more a monument to dread than a source of life. The air was thick with heat and an oppressive silence that spoke louder than any words. Mara Silva stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding in rhythm with the slow, deliberate steps of the approaching procession. Children were absent, their disappearance a heavy weight on every face. The townsfolk's eyes flickered nervously toward the well's gaping abyss of darkness that seemed to swallow hope itself. Mara's gaze never wavered from Elias Marquez, the town elder, who moved forward with the solemnity of one who carried the burden of centuries. Behind him followed Father Rosales, his gaunt figure clad in a faded cassack, a man whose sermons had become the twisted backbone of the well's cult worship. Mara's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unwavering. "This ends today," she declared, stepping onto the cracked stones with a resolve that drew the eyes of every witness. "No more children will be taken. No more lies will bind us to this cursed well." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Ilias's weathered face tightened, the lines of age and guilt deepening. "You do not understand, Mara," he said, his voice gravelly with years of suppressed sorrow. "This is our survival. The sacrifice must continue. Survival at what cost?" Mara challenged, her eyes blazing. "How many more must vanish into the darkness? How long will we let this Hollow One feed on our children and our souls?" Father Rosales stepped forward, his voice low and commanding. "The well's demands are divine. To question is to invite ruin. Submission is our salvation." "Salvation," Mara replied, stepping closer. "You preach obedience while condemning our children to oblivion. I will not stand by and watch this cycle repeat." The tension thickened, the air crackling with unspoken threats and ancient fear. Elias raised a trembling hand, signaling for calm. "There are truths you do not know," he confessed, his voice breaking. "The well is no mere hole in the earth. It is a gateway, a hunger born from forgotten waters and desperate prayers. Each sacrifice feeds the Hollow One, and in return, it grants us this barren land's harsh mercy." Mara's breath caught as the weight of his words settled over her. The town's fate, her brother's disappearance, the dread that clung like a second skin, all intertwined in a tapestry of despair and blind faith. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square, the ritual preparations continued with grim inevitability. Candles were lit, and the scent of burning sage mingled with the dry desert air. Mara found Lucia and Benito at her side, their faces pale but resolute. "We can't let this happen," Lucia whispered, clutching Mara's arm. "Not again," Benito nodded, his steady gaze scanning the restless crowd. "The desert itself seems to hold its breath." Together, they moved as one, ready to challenge the darkness that had claimed their town for generations. The last ritual was upon them, a crucible where hope and horror would collide beneath the scorching sky. Mara's defiance echoed in the stillness, a fragile spark against the abyss. But as the well's dark hunger stirred beneath, the true battle was only beginning, a fight not just for Tomas, but for the soul of Arroyo Seco itself. And somewhere deep below, the Hollow One waited, its eyes like pits of endless thirst, watching, hungering, and ready to consume all who dared to defy the shadowed covenant. The sun set in a blaze of fiery red, casting the well into deeper darkness, as the town held its breath, poised on the edge of oblivion. The sun hung high and merciless over Arroyo Seco, its relentless heat pressing down on the cracked earth like a weight impossible to bear. Dust rose in faint spirals, caught in the dry breath of the desert wind, carrying with it the scent of parched soil and ancient secrets. Mara Silva's gaze fixed on the well at the town's heart, a hollow monument to despair and tradition. Today, she would confront the darkness that had stolen her brother, the well's insatiable hunger, and the blind faith that fed it. Around her, the small group she had gathered moved with tense determination. Lucia's hands trembled slightly, fingers twisting a faded scarf, while Benito's eyes scanned the horizon, muscles coiled in readiness. Elias had reluctantly agreed to come, his presence a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of their task. Mara's heart hammered, not just from the heat, but from the knowledge that this moment could change everything or doom them all. The townsfolk had gathered as they always did in the summer heat, clad in worn robes faded by sun and dust. Their faces were masks of solemnity, etched with lines of resignation and fear. A low chant began to rise, a steady rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat through the sweltering air. It was the sound of generations bound by ritual and sacrifice, a dirge for the missing, a prayer for survival. Mara stepped forward, the cracked earth crunching beneath her boots. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear despite the tremor of heat and dread in her chest. "This ends now," she declared, eyes blazing like coals. "We cannot feed this hollow hunger with our children any longer. There is no salvation in sacrifice, only endless loss." A murmur rippled through the crowd, like wind stirring dry leaves. Some faces twisted in shock, others hardened into scowls of anger. The old rituals were sacred. The town's fragile survival depended on them. But Mara's words planted seeds of doubt, thin shoots of rebellion struggling toward light. Father Roselle stepped forward, his gaunt figure casting a long shadow. His voice was sharp, trembling with a fury barely contained. "Blasphemy! You threaten the very fabric of our faith. The well demands obedience, and through it, we endure. To defy is to invite doom." The chant faltered, eyes darting between Mara and the priest, the air thick with tension. Sweat dripped into Mara's eyes, stinging, but she would not waver. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the parched earth beneath them humming with the weight of generations of fear and hope. In the sudden silence, a flicker of movement. Mara's allies seized the moment, disrupting the ceremonial fire that crackled weakly against the dry wind. Sparks rose and scattered, swallowed quickly by the dust. Chaos blossomed as voices clashed, some shouting prayers, others cries of rebellion. Mara's heart pounded with fierce hope and raw fear. The well's hunger had been challenged, its shadow momentarily broken, but the cost was unknown, the path ahead uncertain. The sun blazed overhead, relentless and unforgiving, as the desert bore witness to the first flicker of defiance, fragile, tenuous, but alive. Night would come, and with it, the darkness beneath the well. But tonight, amidst the cracked earth and whispered doubts, a spark had been struck. Mara's voice echoed, a promise and a warning. The cycle could be broken, but only if they dared to stand against the hollow shadows of their past. The desert wind carried that promise far and wide, into the hearts of those who dared to listen, and into the abyss that waited patiently below. The heat of the blazing sun made the cracked ground shimmer as Mara and her small band approached the ritual site. The well, dry and hollow, loomed like a dark scar at the town's center. Around it, the townsfolk gathered, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats and scarves, their voices low and rhythmic in the ancient chant. Lucia's eyes flicked nervously to Mara. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, voice tight with fear. Mara met her gaze, fierce and unwavering. "If we don't act now, nothing will change. Tomas is still down there, somewhere. We have to try." Benito scanned the gathering crowd, muscles taut beneath his worn shirt. "We don't have much time. Once this starts, it's harder to stop." The first words of Mara's declaration cut through the murmurs like a whip. "This ends now. No more children lost to this hollow curse." Gasps and murmurs erupted. Some stepped back, afraid. Others stared, eyes narrowing in suspicion or anger. Father Rosals's voice rose, sharp and condemning. "Blasphemy. The well demands sacrifice. Without it, we perish." The crowd's chant faltered, wavering between fear and defiance. Mara pressed on, her voice ringing out. "Blind faith has fed this darkness for too long. It's time to break free." Suddenly, the ceremonial fire sputtered as Benito threw a handful of dry brush onto it, sending sparks swirling into the dry air. The crowd scattered in confusion and outrage. Shouts filled the desert air, mingling with the dry wind and the distant cry of a hawk. Mara's heart thundered in her chest. This is our town, our children. We have a choice. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the cracked earth, the desert held its breath. Would hope survive the night? The desert night stretched out like a vast, unyielding shroud over Arroyo Seco, the stars obscured by a veil of parching heat that refused to dissipate even as the sun sank below the horizon. Mara stood at the edge of the cracked well, its once proud stone rim now fragmented and scorched, a dark monument to the town's deepest fears. Beside her, Lucia's fingers trembled slightly as she gripped a small amulet pressed close to her chest, while Benito's eyes scanned the shifting shadows with practiced vigilance. The oppressive silence was broken only by the distant whistle of the wind, carrying with it the scent of dry sand and bitter memories. Mara's heart pounded, her breath shallow and uneven as she recalled the knowledge Elias had entrusted to her, ancient texts inked in faded script, speaking of the Hollow Ones, insatiable thirst, and the cost exacted by the well's dark hunger. Suddenly, the air thickened, the temperature dropping with a cruel sharpness that raised goosebumps along Mara's sun-baked skin. A ripple fractured the darkness at the well's center, a distortion as if reality itself were bending away from something utterly alien and malevolent. Shapes began to coalesce, shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a violent storm, their edges undefined and trembling with otherworldly energy. The Hollow One emerged. Its form was an ever-changing shadow, a mass of darkness that seemed to swallow the very light around it. Two deep pits of blackness, eyes that burned with an endless, aching thirst, fixed on Mara with a hunger that clawed at the edges of her sanity. The earth beneath their feet cracked and splintered, dust swirling into a furious tempest that screamed the town's long-forgotten laments. Mara's muscles tensed, the weight of the relics she carried grounding her despite the swirling chaos. She met the entity's gaze with a fierce determination born of desperation and love. A determination to protect her lost brother Tomas and all the children swallowed by this cursed place. Lucia stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper but resolute. "We will not let it claim us tonight. Not this time." Benito tightened his grip on a hunting knife, the metal gleaming faintly in the moonlight. It feeds on fear and silence. We fight it with defiance and truth. The Hollow One recoiled, its form contorting into a whirlwind of shadow and despair, lashing out with tendrils of darkness that twisted the very air and summoned visions of sacrifice long past. Mara's mind was assailed by images of children's faces, their eyes wide with terror and pleading, their voices drowned by the relentless desert wind. Pain flared sharp and sudden across Mara's chest, a psychic lash, a reminder of the cost of resistance. Yet she held firm, chanting fragments of the ancient incantations Elias had painstakingly translated, words meant to bind and repel the entity's insidious power. The desert's thirst became a living thing around them, a cruel dryness that clawed at their throats, a spiritual drought that mirrored the town's fractured soul. Each breath was a struggle, each heartbeat a defiant drum against the encroaching void. As the Hollow One's fury reached a crescendo, a sudden stillness fell. The dust settled, the shadows retracted, and for a fleeting moment, the first fragile droplets of moisture glistened on the cracked earth. Hope, delicate and trembling, flickered beneath the unforgiving night. But Mara knew this was only the beginning. The entity's punishment had been severe, its wrath unforgiving. The battle had been won, but the war for Arroyo Seco's soul was far from over. She turned to her allies, their faces illuminated by the pale moonlight, etched with exhaustion, but alive with resolve. "We've made it flinch," Mara said, voice steady despite the weariness. "Now we fight to keep it on the back foot." Lucia nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. For the children, for Tomas Benito's grip on his knife tightened once more. For the town we can still save. The well's lament echoed faintly on the wind, a mournful song of thirst and sacrifice, but beneath it, the promise of defiance beat strong and steady. The hollow darkness might hunger still, but so did the flame of resistance burning within Mara and those who dared to stand with her. Night deepened, and the desert held its breath, waiting, watching, as the fragile hope took root in the parched earth. The fight was not over, but the first cracks had formed in the curse's unyielding grasp, and Mara would not rest until the last child was free. The sun dipped low over Arroyo Seco, casting long, twisted shadows across the cracked earth where the town lay broken and weary. Mara Silva stood at the edge of the square, her eyes fixed on the hollow well at the Centaura Black Moor, swallowing the dying light, indifferent and eternal. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of dust and smoke, mingled with the distant murmurs of townsfolk who had gathered in restless clusters. The rebellion had fractured them. The fragile unity of Arroyo Seco splintered into shards of fear, anger, and despair. She felt the weight of it all pressing down, the scorching weight of the desert sun replaced by the cold oppression of uncertainty. The well's hunger was not sated. It lingered like a spectre over every cracked wall and whispered prayer. The blood and sacrifice had not broken its hold. If anything, the darkness beneath seemed to grow, feeding on the town's fractured soul. Mara's hands clenched the worn edge of Tomas's shirt, the fabric soft and thin in her grasp. The memory of his wide, innocent eyes haunted her so, full of hope and trust before the abyss claimed him. Grief twisted deep inside her, a raw, aching pulse that throbbed beneath her ribs. But grief was no longer enough. It could not be. She had to find a way forward, even as the shadows of doubt and fear crept closer. Voices rose in the square, sharp and bitter, cutting through the heavy silence. Mara's gaze shifted to the crowd, where townsfolk argued with a fierceness born of desperation. Some accused her, openly blaming her for stirring unrest, for challenging the rituals that had kept Arroyo Seco alive for generations. Others whispered of change, of hope, trembling on the edge of belief. The lines were drawn, and Mara stood at the fault. Lucia Torres moved through the crowd with guarded steps, her dark eyes flickering with both anxiety and resolve. Benito Cruz followed closely, his steady presence a silent anchor in the storm. They had survived the confrontation, but the cost was etched deep into their faces. The rebellion had not brought salvation. It had only peeled back the layers of fear, exposing the raw nerves beneath. "We can't give up," Lucia whispered when she reached Mara, her voice trembling but fierce. "There are others, quiet ones, who want the same as us. Change, freedom from the well's shadow." Mara nodded, the weight of leadership settling heavier on her shoulders than ever before. "Then we fight not with fire or blades, but with truth. We must unravel the lies that bind this town before the well claims us all." But even as she spoke, the oppressive silence of the desert night pressed in, a reminder that the well's hunger was not just a curse, but a living, breathing force. It watched, waited, and fed on the fractures within. Later, Mara sat alone in the dim light of her home, the room thick with stale air and the scent of sweat and dust. The worn shirt of Tomas lay crumpled in her lap as she whispered promises into the dark. "I will break this. I will bring you back, no matter the cost." Her voice was barely more than a breath, fragile against the vast silence. But beneath that fragility burned a fierce determination, a stubborn flame refusing to be extinguished. Outside, the town simmered in uneasy quiet. The rebels scattered, the fearful retreated, and the well remained a gaping wound in the heart of Arroyo Seco, a reminder of all they had lost and all still at stake. In the shadowed alcove of an abandoned building, Lucia and Benito bent low over a flickering candle. Their whispered plans were cautious, their faces etched with tension. "We can't face the well alone," Benito murmured. "But together, maybe we stand a chance." Lucia's nod was slow, deliberate. "We'll gather those who still believe, those willing to fight for their children and their future. It's a fragile hope, but it's all we have." The candle's flame wavered, casting long, uncertain shadows. Outside, the desert wind stirred the dust, carrying with it the distant, almost imperceptible sound of the well's insatiable hunger. The fractured horizons of Arroyo Seco stretched before them, scarred, uncertain, but not yet broken. Mara's vow hung in the air, a silent challenge to the darkness beneath. The cycle could be broken. But to do so, they would have to face the abyss once more and confront the monstrous entity waiting in its depths. As night deepened, the town held its breath, caught between despair and defiance. The well watched, patient and eternal, as the children's disappearances continued in shadow. Mara's journey was far from over, and the desert's thirst whispered promises of both salvation and ruin. The horizon fractured, but the story was not finished. Mara Silva would stand against the darkness, even if it meant losing herself to the hollow well's endless hunger. And somewhere beneath the parched earth, the abyss waited patiently for the next sacrifice. The sun hung low over Arroyo Seco, its merciless rays casting long, wavering shadows across the cracked earth. Mara Silva stood at the edge of the dried-up well, the ancient stone rim scorched and crumbling beneath her fingers. Around her, the town simmered in uneasy, quiet and omnipresent tension that clung to the air like the desert heat. Her eyes, sharp and weary, traced the hollow abyss below. It was a void that had claimed so many, a darkness that had swallowed the town's children year after year, feeding an insatiable hunger that seemed as old as the desert itself. Tomas was gone now, vanished into that endless pit. And though she had clawed her way through darkness and madness to find him, the victory felt hollow. Behind her, the murmur of the town was a restless undercurrent. Some watched from dusty doorways, their faces etched with fear and resignation. Others avoided her gaze, unwilling to confront the truths she had unearthed. Mara could feel their eyes, some accusatory, some pleading, yet none dared to break the silence that had become the town's shield and prison. Her breath caught as a faint wind stirred the dust, carrying with it a whisper that seemed almost like children's laughter, distant and haunting. It was a cruel echo, a reminder of what had been lost and what remained at stake. The well, once a source of life-giving water, was now a monument to despair, a dark deity demanding endless sacrifice. Mara, a voice called softly from behind. She turned to see Elias Marquez, the town elder, stepping forward with slow, deliberate steps. His face was a map of years spent under the relentless sunlines of guilt and sorrow etched deep in his skin. He wore his dusty desert robes like armor, a symbol of the traditions that had both protected and cursed Arroyo Seco. "You're still here," Elias said, voice low but steady. "I have to be," Mara replied, her tone unwavering. "Someone has to stand against this." Elias sighed, the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. The well's hunger is old. It cannot be sated by words or rebellion alone. "Then it's time to find another way," Mara said fiercely. "We can't keep losing children, losing hope." They stood in silence, the oppressive heat wrapping around them like a shroud. Mara's gaze drifted back to the well, to the darkness that had swallowed Thomas and countless others. The hollow, one formless and endless, lurked beneath, its eyes like pits of oblivion, its thirst eternal. Nightfall came slowly, bringing a cool reprieve, but no relief. In the shadows of her small, sparse home, Mara lay awake, the visions that had plagued her since her descent into the abyss returning with relentless force. The Hollow One's insatiable hunger gnawed at her mind, twisting memories and fears into a tapestry of nightmares. The faces of the vanished children flickered like ghosts, their silence a deafening scream in the quiet room. Lucia Torres knocked softly before entering, her anxious eyes meeting Mara's. "They're waiting for you," she whispered. "Some of us want to fight back." Mara nodded, gratitude mingling with the weight of responsibility. The fragile hope that had taken root in her heart was fragile indeed, but it was enough to kindle a spark in the suffocating darkness. Outside, Benito Cruz waited by the edge of town, his rugged silhouette framed by the stars. The desert wind stirred the dust and carried the scent of dry earth and distant rain, promise unfulfilled. Together, they would face the lingering shadows, challenging a fate that had long seemed inevitable. As Mara stepped into the night, the well's silent hunger pulsed beneath her feet, reminder that the cycle was far from broken. But for the first time in years, a flicker of defiance burned bright against the dark horizon. The children of Arroyo Seco remained lost in shadow, but Mara's vow echoed through the desert air, a promise to reclaim life from the hollow depths. And somewhere, deep beneath the cracked earth, the well waited, patient and unyielding, its thirst eternal. The story was not over. Mara's footsteps echoed softly on the dry dirt as she moved through the town square, now nearly deserted under the fading stars. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust, a reminder of the relentless desert that surrounded them. She paused to look back at the well, its rim a black silhouette against the dim glow of the horizon. It was a gaping maw into oblivion, both a curse and a symbol of the town's long-held fears. "They'll come for us again," Lucia whispered beside her, voice trembling but resolute. "The well will call more children." Mara clenched her fists, the memories of Tomas's disappearance still raw and aching. "Not if we stop it," she said. Benito emerged from the shadows, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. "The desert won't give up its secrets easily," he said. "But neither will we." Together, the three stood united against the silence that had swallowed Arroyo Seco for generations. The rituals, the sacrifices, the blind faithful woven into the fabric of their lives. Mara knew the road ahead was fraught with danger and despair, but she refused to let the darkness claim another child. As dawn began to break, painting the sky with streaks of blood red and gold, Mara took a deep breath. The well-awaited, endless and hungry. But so was she.